About today, we'll be going through the process of exporting a workflow from Dockstore to Terra. So in many cases, um, like you've learned in previous days of the workshop, you're going to be writing your own workflows, but much of the time it will be more prudent or you're trying to reproduce someone else's work. Um, so you may want to find a workflow on Dockstore and use it again on Terra. You'll also learn how to set up your own GitHub repository to automatically push new workflow content to Dockstore. This is a bit of an iterative process. So the idea is that you can iterate, test locally, upload it to GitHub, and then push it periodically to GitHub and through Dockstore into Terra. We're going to go through a demo of that process. And at the end, I'm also going to go through a bit of a tutorial on how you might want to find and evaluate workflows on Dockstore. So there's a lot of workflows on Dockstore, and you may want to sort of learn how to evaluate them, judge their quality, find out which ones might be more reliable than others. So that's the kind of thing you'll be learning about in today's workshop. So what is Dockstore? So Dockstore is essentially an app, what we consider like an app store for bioinformatics. We're a free and open source platform, and we allow users to share things like analytical tools, workflows, notebooks, although we'll be focusing on workflows today. And Dockstore is a collaboration between OICR, the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, and the University of California, Santa Cruz Genomics Institute. The idea is that when you create a workflow on Dockstore, we're trying to sort of help you along the portability process, making it easy to move your analysis from environment to environment. In some cases, that might mean making it easy to move between your local environment to maybe a fellow developer's local environment. It could mean moving from your local environment to a HPC cluster or a commercial cloud. Essentially, if it can run Docker, or in some cases, some container runtimes that are compatible with Docker, a workflow uploaded on Dockstore can run in a wide variety of environments. And we basically rely upon, yes, that container, but we also support 4 workflow languages. In this workshop, we're focusing mostly on WDL, but I would also note that while Dockstore supports CWL, WDL, Nextflow, and Galaxy, there are also tutorials available for running Galaxy on Galaxy workflows on Terra. I think I've added a link to that later in the workshop. Um, so yeah, with Dockstore, not only do we support those 4 workflow languages, but the idea is that you can bring a workflow from different types of source control. Currently, we have support for GitLab, GitHub, and Bitbucket. And your Docker containers can be stored on Quay.io, on Docker Hub, or on AWS ECR. And from there, you can launch it onto Terra or other environments that support the particular workflow language that you're working in. So for example, if you were looking at a particular workflow, Optimus, you would pick a particular version of that workflow and then launch it into different environments. Some environments would be things like DNA Nexus, Alwazi, Anvil, which support WDL, but today we'll be working with Terra. And so there's some step-by-step instructions that you can find on the Terra support page, but I'll also go through a bit of a demo here. So just getting out of the screen, getting out of the slideshow. Okay, here I go. So when you're on Dockstore, on dockstore.org, you'll land on our homepage. And what you'll want to do when you're reusing workflows typically is you'll want to go through the search. And the search is a faceted search, so you have different ways of narrowing down what particular workflows you're interested in. You might be interested in particular versions of WDL, so there are some older versions of WDL you might want to exclude from your search. You may want to narrow it down to like GitHub or particular organizations or ones with execution metrics, and I'll talk a bit about that later. But today I know that I'm interested in, say, the Broad Institute's WARP Optimus pipeline. So I'm going to click through to that. And when it loads, you'll see that someone's been working on it recently, about 16 minutes ago. Um, you'll probably want to click through and launch a particular version of that workflow. So in my case, I know that there are some tagged versions. So for example, Optimus 7.9.2, which was created in March. If I look through to the top here, I can see that now I've selected 7.9.2. And for a further check, you can go through, potentially look at some of the descriptors, some of the test parameter files if they've been provided by the user. And yeah, you can basically look at the um, options for launching the workflow. Today we'll be working with Terra, so I'm going to click on this button, and that will take me through to the Terra interface. I have a workshop prepared today, sorry, a workspace prepared today, so I'll click on import. And what that will do is it'll import that particular version of the workflow into the workspace. Here, you might want to check that you've imported the correct version. In this case, yes, I've imported 7.9.2. And at this point, you can basically go through the rest of what you've learned in previous days of the workshop to run your workflow and get results. So going through to the next step, there are some Dockster instructions that we've provided for basically working through what an example YAML file is. I'm going to have a proper demo later in the presentation to basically have you guys walk through the process of creating a Dockster.yaml file for describing your workflows on GitHub. And yeah, we've gone through the process of looking in a particular workflow and selecting different workflow versions to launch into Terra. Any questions before I sort of move on? Okay, cool. I'm going to go back into the slideshow. Okay, so this will be the demo section. So the first demo was basically how would I use an existing workflow on Dockstore? So basically going through using a work repository which already exists and using a workflow provided by the Broad. This next demo will basically go through how to create your own workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to download a tutorial WDL file. You could probably also use a WDL file of your own from earlier within the workshop. So I'm downloading that onto my own desktop. The next step would be to create a repository on GitHub. In my case, I have an organization set up already, Dockstore Workshops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new repository in here. I'm going to call it Workshop 2025 Demo. Make sure to set your repository to public. That way, not only will you be able to share your workflow with others, but Dockster will be able to see that workflow and get it imported into Terra. Probably want to initialize your repository with a README file. If you know that you have a particular license, you can also select an open source license for your workflow if you are indeed sharing it freely with others. So now that I've created the repository, what I can do is I can add a particular file. In my case, in the tutorial, we're going to be adding a WDL-101-bam.wdl file, and I'm going to want to copy the code over from my desktop. Let me grab that content and paste it. So this is the WDL file itself. So I'm going to commit changes directly to the repository. Now, what you'll want to do within Dockstore itself is if you haven't logged in already, the site will look a bit more like this. You may want to quickly read through our terms of service and privacy policy. But the first like actual step from a functional point of view is to register. So you've created a GitHub account or probably came with a GitHub account to the workshop. So you'll first want to register an account. You can also register with Google. In my case, registration didn't really work because I already have a account on Dockstore. But this will look fairly similar. You're going to log into GitHub, log in via GitHub, and then you'll be in the Dockstore interface. You'll go through to My Dockstore. In your case, when you're registering a completely new account, you'll be asked a few questions like, what username do you want to use? You may want to like change your username as long as it doesn't conflict with someone else. And then I think when you click next, you'll also be prompted if you want to learn how to use like our command line interface tool. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in your presentation as well. You'll land on a page here in the dashboard. Your page will be a bit less populated, but that's kind of what we're working on today to sort of populate your entries on Dockstore. And you'll be working with workflows today. When you go into Dockstore, you'll see a listing of like GitHub repositories that it's aware of. And in the case that you're working with GitLab or Bitbucket, you will see organizations there for that as well. In my case, I'm going to have to discover the existing repository, and you can skip that step in your case. Let's give it a couple of seconds. Okay, so I'm going to register a workflow, register using GitHub Apps. And if I double check, my repository was called Tennis Yoon Workshop 2025 Demo. So what I'm going to do is click this button. Sorry, I should probably slow down a little bit. So on the first step of the register a new workflow using GitHub Apps interface, you'll be prompted to basically manage the GitHub app on GitHub. This GitHub app is what we use in order to monitor changes to your workflow on GitHub. When you click through this button, you'll get into the GitHub interface, and you'll need to look for your particular organization where you've created your um, workflow. So I'm clicking through to Dockstore workshops. In some cases, you may want to select a particular repository. If, for example, you have a few repositories inside your organization that have workflows. In my case, all the repositories, or rather the one repository within Dockstore workshops is a workflow. So I'm just going to hit install. In my case, I'm going to use the security key. This might sort of depend on whether you have two-factor authentication enabled on your environment. Let's retry that. Okay. And after clicking through two-factor authentication, if you have that enabled in GitHub, you'll encounter this landing page. So it'll take a couple of minutes, as it says, for Dockstore to be aware of your repository after you've registered your repository with Dockstore. But in the meantime, you can basically read through this landing page. So this landing page is a bit customized depending on whether you're working with workflows or tools or notebooks. You'll have an example Dockstore.yaml template that you can fill out with your information. Some sort of tips and tricks to watch out for. So it's kind of important to make sure you name the Dockstore.yaml with the correct name. And if you're in a repository, you can actually use a Dockstore.yaml to register multiple workflows in one repository if you have that in your repository. So what's the next step? So I'm going to go back to the repository. I've gone through a process of adding my WDL file. I've registered the repository with Dockstore. The next step is to add a Dockstore.yaml. In my case, I'm just going to grab this one from the workshop. and I'm going to paste it into my repository. Add file. And you're curious what the moving parts here are. This is not a WDL version. This is the version of the Dockstore.yaml file. In other words, it doesn't happen very often. As you can see, this is really just our second or third iteration of Dockstore.yaml, but this basically tells Dockstore what version of a Dockstore.yaml you're working with. You're working with WDL today, so this is where you would specify the workflow language you're working with. The primary descriptor path is sort of the entry point to your workflow. Today, this is just WDL-101 BAM within the root directory. In WDL, you also have the option of adding test parameter files. So the idea is when you're testing your workflow with small input data or even with large input data, you probably want to run your workflow and make sure that it works. Now, that's useful not only for yourself, but it could be useful for others. So you have the option of adding a test parameter file that other people can use. Other people can use that test parameter file in order to reproduce your work. In some cases, you might also want to use it in GitHub Actions, if you're familiar with GitHub Actions, to test and run your workflow on GitHub itself. Last but not least, you probably want people to know about you when you're writing your workflow. So there's an array here that you can specify your authorship. There's a couple of different ways of specifying your authorship in Dockstore. You can add your name and email, but the most recent way of doing it is to add your ORCID ID. Your Open Researcher ID, I think that's the acronym, basically is a open service that allows you to register your information like your institution, the papers that you've published, and adding in your ORCID basically makes sure that people can also link through to your ORCID profile when they read or use your workflow, giving you credit for the work that you've done. So I'm going to commit the changes here. And that's going to start the process of it being registered in Dockstore. So this will take a couple of minutes, but while I'm waiting, what I'm also going to do is show another feature in Dockstore. So in Dockstore, one feature that we have is app logs. So during this process, I mean, hopefully there won't be mistakes, but there is a chance of mistakes. So we have a feature called app logs. So when you click through to it, you can basically see what's going on with a particular workflow. So you can see like what time a particular workflow was updated and whether it was successful. If it wasn't successful, you can click through and maybe get some hints on what was wrong with it. So for example, in this particular case, maybe the repository name was incorrect. And you might encounter different issues like syntax errors in your dockstore.yaml, your dockstore.yaml not being named correctly, that sort of thing. So I'm going to refresh and then I'm going to go back to, yeah, okay, so it hasn't appeared yet. So, oh, actually, I guess I created it within my own profile. So I'm going to look into Dennis Yoon and then workshop. Okay, yeah, okay, I see what I did here. So, um, I was thinking of creating it within a different organization. I added my app to the wrong organization. This is something that wouldn't necessarily show up in app logs, but I'm just gonna have to go through that process again. So adding the workflow, manage the GitHub app install, go into my profile. This is an example of installing it into a particular organization and installing one particular, oh, sorry, workshop 2025 demo. I'm going to save that. So now that I've actually installed the correct one, you may need to touch the Dockstore.yaml or like some file within a repository. Um, Basically, what's going on here is after the first install process, you may need like one more event to sort of prime the pump and sort of start the process off. So I'm going to just add a bit of documentation here. This is an example workflow for the WDL Bootstrap. Or sorry, workflow shop. I get to commit those changes. And then we're going to have to wait a few moments for it to appear on Dockstore again. Sorry about that. While we're waiting, does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to go back to workflow. So you can see that this particular repository now shows up in my GitHub logs. The first time it ran, it looks like it encountered validation errors. It couldn't find a particular WDL 101-BAM. This was at 126. So I may want to check on the contents of that repository and make sure everything is correct. YAML, the WDL 101-BAM is there. WDL-101-BAM. Must have a typo here. WDL. Oh, I see. So this is an example where the app logs actually did pay off. So you can see here that I had a typo. So WDL 101-BAM here has a dash. The example that I've added to the repository doesn't have a dash. So I'm going to edit the file, change its file name, and commit that again. While I'm at it, I'm going to take a look and see if I had any other errors. So the primary descriptor file was not found. That seems to be the only error, so I'm going to have to wait a little bit for that to show up. Okay, there we go. So now the workflow has shown up. Let's see, I think that was 2 minutes ago. There's a source file, so WDL 101bam.wdl. And yeah, that's basically the process of getting stuff into Dockstore. Let's see, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Go to slideshow. Yeah, so sorry, a bit of a rough process there. But in a process, you did learn how to sort of debug the process of getting stuff into Dockstore. So those GitHub apps can be a bit of a lifesaver, both for you and for myself in this case. We learned also about the Discover Tools and Workflows button. So when that comes into play is when you are working in the same organization as one of your coworkers. So for example, if you had an organization for your lab, you added particular workflows. Those workflows won't necessarily be visible immediately when your coworker logs into Dockstore. So they may need to hit that Discover Tools and Workflows button in order for that workflow to show up. Finally, during your sign up process, You may encounter the CLI tool. That CLI tool allows you to do a few things like basically test workflows locally on your own computer, but there is also a validator tool that can basically validate issues with your Dockstore.yaml, and it can basically look for issues such as this in case you want to iterate a bit faster than saving things on GitHub and waiting for Dockstore to refresh. So sort of that process where I needed to wait a couple of minutes for Dockstore, you can do that quickly on your own computer. And um, in this case, the error that's in this particular Dockstore.yaml might be just stuff with white space. So the particular field might be indented too much in terms of white space. Um, okay, so here's an exercise that we'll go through. We've already gone through the first part. So that's searching for workflows via facets and popular keywords. Um, So when you're in Dockstore and you're looking for a particular workflow, we sort of went through the process of narrowing down by language version. You can also just straight out search for workflows. So for example, if I know I'm interested in workflows from work, I can basically search for work and it'll give me a bit of context as to why I picked a particular workflow. The other way of organizing workflows are organizations. Um, these organizations are completely separate from organizations on GitHub. The idea is it kind of works like YouTube playlists. So if you're working for a particular lab or a particular organization, you can create your own organization by creating an organization request. And what that will do is it'll send a request to our admins. They will check that your profile has a couple of accounts listed. So before you make a request, you probably want to link your profile with, say, your GitHub profile or your ORCID profile, your Zenodo profile. You need at least two profiles linked before requesting an organization. At that point, you can basically favorite or create collections of the workflows that you're interested in. So for example, if your lab is very hyped about a particular workflow from the Broad, from Galaxy, from Anvil, you can basically create a collection that says, hey, I use this. Today, since we're giving a workshop in coordination with the Broad, here's a collection from like GATK. So you can basically click through and look at workflows from GATK, read up about why they think those workflows are interesting and worth your time. The other thing that you can do in the organization view is see who's associated with a particular organization. If you click on a particular user, you can be like, hey, do I trust this person? You can click on their ORCID account, get an idea of what publications they've created, their GitHub account to see what they've worked on GitHub recently, just to basically see, hey, what has this person worked on recently and do I trust them? Last but not least, when you're searching through workflows, we've recently introduced something called metrics. And what you can do there is basically click through to the metrics tab. Periodically, we will have new batches of data come through from Terra with information about how often a workflow has been run. So in this case, this is a relatively old tag, a workflow that was created in 2020, but it's been run 35,000 times successfully. So 71% of the time it has run successfully and has a runtime somewhere in the middle between like a minute and like a complete maximum of 35 minutes. So it kind of gives you a sense that this workflow should be pretty successful if you give it a shot and try to run it. So yeah, those are some of the ways that you can narrow down whether you're interested in a particular workflow. You can look at organizations, look at who belongs to an organization, and then look at how often people have run a particular workflow to see whether it's worth considering. And do consider creating your own organization if that's the case. Okay. So the other thing that I would point out quickly are sort of publishing, exporting, and sharing workflows. So Dockstore has a variety of different features that allow you to share workflows. I'm not going to go through the entire part of this today, but what some of the features are on Dockstore is you can basically snapshot workflows, mint DOIs, and then export them to ORCID profiles. Um, this first option is something that you can do manually, but Dockstore will also automatically create DOIs without going through the process up to this step, basically. There's more info in the documentation about like how Dockstore will go about that. Basically, the distinction is if you want more control over the DOIs that are created and sort of what ORCID profile is linked to those DOIs, you want to go through the manual process. You can customize the DOI process, and that's something that we're working on more recently. A workflow in the first step can be made immutable. So what you may want to do in some cases is if you're working a workflow, you've been changing it for a while, you can snapshot a particular version of it, basically saying that it will never change after that point. After you've snapshotted it, you can mint a DOI on Zenodo. Zenodo is like a common interface based in Switzerland, where you can basically mint a digital object identifier. Digital object identifiers are commonly used in papers, and you can create a DOI both for your workflow as a whole, but also for specific versions of your workflow. And then afterwards, that workflow can show up in your ORCID profile as well. Yeah, so to wrap up and go through your next steps, we've sort of gone through the process of integrating a uh, a Dockstore formatted GitHub repository, and then exporting versions of that workflow to Terra. Um, in previous iterations of the workshop, you've probably played around with setting up Cromwell locally. There's also information on the Dockstore workshop for basically showing you how to basically set up Cromwell locally if you want to run WDL workflows locally. If you run into issues with Dockstore, with Terra, you can always contact us. I believe at the end of the presentation, there's an email for the team at Terra, but Dockstore also has like a help desk. When you click through to the footer on Dockstore, you can basically go to our discourse forum, contact us, and basically ask us for help. Um, if you want to play around in Terra, you also may want to set up a Google account, and that lets you set up a billing account. So putting it all together, you want to think about your analysis in discrete steps. So in WDL, you want to create an overall workflow, but you also want to think about the individual tasks in that workflow. You'll want to find either pre-existing Docker images that can run each individual step. I think you learned also that it may be useful to build Docker images using official images that are well maintained. Um, Afterwards, after customizing those Docker images, you may want to push it to a public repository like Docker Hub, like Quay.io, so others can use it or Terra can use it. Yeah, we talked about when you're creating a workflow, you want to split up the tasks of that particular workflow into different tasks, and then combine them into a WDL workflow. You want to run it locally with small data. Um, this allows you to more quickly iterate. Not only do most workflows run more quickly when you're using small data, but you don't need to sort of wait for it to be pushed up to Terra. You can iterate more quickly running locally. But when you are ready, you can basically set up GitHub, automatically push your WDL file to Dockstore, and then export your workflow from Dockstore to Terra. So that's putting everything together. And then, yeah, you'll want to test your workflow in Terra. And the last step is you might want to run it with large scale data. So instead of running it locally on small pieces of data, now that you're on the cloud within Terra, you have the benefit of using a much larger compute. So you can use larger input data, although you still want to monitor the process and make sure everything's running correctly. So yeah, iterate as necessary. We've also put together some resources that are useful for you. Um, so there's tutorials for basically going through the processes of installing the Dockstore-GitHub app. Today, we used an example from the WARP repository when we were selecting the Optimus workflow. But that group has also put together best practices for how to optimize your workflow to make it cheaper to run in the long term. Um, there's some documentation on Cromwell. That's that workflow engine that you can run locally and sort of powers Terra behind the scenes as well. And yeah, as I mentioned, we only ran through WDL workflows today, but you also have the option of running Galaxy workflows. And there's a couple of tutorials, both from the Dockstore point of view, but the Terra point of view for how to run Galaxy workflows within Terra. Um, and sort of reiterating, so we don't really know what clicks with people. So do take our survey. If you have feedback about what you want to learn about more in future workshops, how we can sort of improve the workshop experience, that sort of thing. So do take our workshop and give us feedback. Here's an email if you want to get more content from the workshop as well. Um, so yeah, we'll be sticking around. If you want to work through the whole process of iterating through and sort of installing um, a GitHub app and integrating into Dockstore and getting it pushed into Dockstore, we'll be around to sort of answer your questions and help you debug. Um, we can probably also help you if you have other questions from previous days of the workshop as well. So I think that about wraps it up.
Thanks so much, Dennis. So that brings us to the end of our workshop. You guys have now gotten to see the whole end-to-end flow of writing WDLs, uploading WDLs, how to launch workflows. Like Jenna said, we're happy to answer any questions either about today's session or about any of the previous sessions. And you can ask those questions now if you like, or feel free to send us a message at either the dsp-workshops@broadinstitute.org email, or if your questions are kind of specific to Terra, please send the email to support@terra.bio. And like I said, please don't forget to fill out our survey. It's very useful for us to know how you enjoyed the content, how you enjoyed the pacing.
I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
Um, Yesterday I was working through the homework and from to get the whittle working on Terra. And when I went and it crashed because it couldn't get SAM tools to work. So I went back to look at SAM tools. And when I tried to run my SAM tools Docker, it was missing Libin curses 5 libraries. So I could install them in the Docker container when I was running it and I'd get SAMtools to work. But how would I change the Docker to be able to work that way? I have a Windows computer.
Um, Dennis, do you have any thoughts here?
Um, yeah, just give me a moment here. I'm just answering the question in the chat. I think there was a question about showing the YAML file. I'm not sure of the syntax. So yeah, this is the example that was provided. I think the slides are available as well, but sort of the syntax you're looking for here is, let's see, I think I talked about this part here. Workflows is an array. So between workflows and the subclass, there's 2 spaces, although it's kind of hard to see. Um, but when you copy and paste it, you'll get 2 spaces before this dash. Why is there a dash here? If you want to specify more than one workflow, you basically want to repeat this section and specify additional workflows. You'll also want to specify a name if you have multiple workflows. The syntax here with the hash mark is a comment. So as I mentioned, you optionally have the choice of providing a parameter file, but here I've commented it out because in our tutorial, we didn't have one of those. So that's why this line has a hash mark. But yeah, hopefully that clears up the syntax, Theo. Um, and sort of going to the other question. Um, okay, so cool. I think that answers the question for syntax. Um, sorry, I kind of mixed it up. Was a person who asked the question Jennifer, or did
Yes.
someone else answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you're asking like, you were unable to run like the Docker container in Windows, or
So I downloaded the copy that um, we're supposed to, and then to make our own and push it to the to Docker. But even though I made like yesterday, I tried it again. I made a brand new folder, downloaded a new copy, and did I think it was exercise 4. It wouldn't work unless I ran the apt get update command.
oh, okay.
So if I tried to do anything with sand tools, it wouldn't work because it was missing those libraries for some reason.
Yeah, so sorry, Anton, could you grab the slides for that section? But I think that is the right thing to try. So essentially I mean, you probably know this already, but apt-get update is basically just going up to Ubuntu's central servers to grab like a list of the most recent dependencies. Maybe the base image that was used was too old, or was missing like the latest list of dependencies from Ubuntu. So it was
But when I use the base image copy that I download, that works. SandTools will work fine with that. But when I use it to make my own version, it won't work.
um, yeah, Anton, sorry, could you grab the slides? Because I don't think I didn't sit in on that particular session, but I could probably figure out what was wrong from the slides.
Yeah, just 1 second. Do you want me to share the slides, or do you want me to? So here are the slides. If you want to
Yeah,
open them and
okay. Let's take a look at it. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay, sorry, this was from day
The intro to Docker.
yeah, the third one right there.
Yeah.
okay,
So
sorry,
if you
which
go
slide?
to like the first exercise, so that Docker Kiernan works. I could pull it and run it, and I get SandTools to run.
Right.
But when I go then down to exercise 4 and try to take a copy of that and do that, so do that exercise and then try to run my copy, it doesn't work. And it's missing those libraries.
Okay. Sorry, you can't really see this next part, but I'm looking at the Docker file. Um, looks like the Docker files from Conda Forge, Mamba Forge. So I think what's going on here is they are different base images. So if I look at here, so eKernan, that's one of the instructors for the workshop. They created their own Docker container and presumably they updated it relatively recently for the workshop. When I look at the Docker file that I downloaded, it says that it's based on the Conda Forge image from a particular time. So when you do the apt-get update, essentially what you're doing is you're checking with Ubuntu, um, Ubuntu's apt repositories for basically a list of everything that's new that you can currently get. Um, so presumably what's happening is that the image in the second exercise is maybe a little bit out of date from what appears on Ubuntu itself. So when you do the apt-get update, that's actually a correct thing to do. So that basically syncs the image with what's available on Ubuntu before trying to install SAM
Right.
tools.
So once I like, if I do that when I'm running the container, but how do I save it in that container so then I can upload it to Terra and run the whittle?
Oh, okay. So yeah, looking at this exercise, so in the exercise, you would go through build, you'd be this push part here. So once you've built it, presumably you can run it in the middle. So if there is like a step 3.5, that's where you sort of could go into the container and run it and try it out. And then in step 4, when you push it to Docker Hub, that would be the process of like where you would um, make it available for other people. In this example, I think as Elizabeth, was it Elizabeth? Would basically be pushing it to her own repository, but you're going to want to substitute your own Docker Hub
Yes.
account.
But
Before,
when
yeah.
like if I tried to do the build command and then run off of my version, it wouldn't save it. It wouldn't work. Like I couldn't update that altered version that didn't have um the libraries.
Oh, I see. So you're
It
running.
only worked while I was in the container running and ran it.
Okay, so you got to switch it up a little. So I think what's going on, and just correct me if I'm wrong. So you ran this command 3, then you're running the Docker container. You're interactively doing the apt-get update, and then
Yes.
okay, I see. So you need to move the apt-get update into the Docker file itself. So
So I
before,
tried adding it into the Docker file where it says it has all the run commands. And I added another backslash, and then the next slide I added the APT update, and then I couldn't even run it.
what's the message you got?
I don't remember, but it was something completely out of my experience.
Okay, let's see here. I think the comment, when I build the image without the platform, SAM tools was installed correctly and it worked, but when I add the flag, libcurses 5 is missing. Chris, are you also working on Windows?
Hi. Yeah, so but mine I was able to actually I had the same issue that was mentioned earlier, but I was able to fix it. So initially the issue we found with my Docker is the Docker was built fine, but because I did not specify the platform, the Terra did not know the whittle kept failing. So then what I ended up doing is I think I saw it somewhere. It says if you have Mac, yeah, right here, Mac 21 and later, you need to add this flag. So then I rebuilt the image based on the recommendation I had from yesterday's TAs to do that. But then what happened is then the new build now did not have this what is it called, the lib and curse 5, and I just added this line at the top before because I could either I could either use a different base instead of using the condown base container to install the SAM tools, or I could just keep it the same and just add this lib and 5 curse 5. I just did that, and then I did the same thing again, built it and then push the Docker and then the Terra. I reran the Terra and it worked fine. I think maybe what the previous person was asking was adding this line in their Docker for the build is probably just adding it at the very beginning of the Docker file um, before the conda part. I don't think, yeah, I think maybe that might help because that worked for me, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's worth a try. Yeah, if I think it was Jennifer, if you could show us the the error message, that might help. But yeah, give that suggestion a try as well.
So where did you add it to the Docker file?
So I could share my screen here. And let me see. I'll just move where is yeah, here. So I don't know if you can see.
Yep.
So I'll show you my Docker file. Sorry, I have yeah. So this is my Docker file. I just added at the beginning here.
So you added a separate run command.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, but it's still using the same base container,
Right.
base. Yeah, I
It
just
just
added
has to
this.
be its own run command.
Yeah, exactly. So ex everything that you were doing outside of the Docker file, you just copy that into the Docker file, and then you rebuilt it.
See, when I added it to the end of run the run commands, just added
All right.
a at the very bottom, and then it gave me an error. So
Oh,
I'll
you
try
added
this.
it here?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't know. I just added a separate run command, but yeah, I'm not sure. And
Yeah,
I can stop sharing. Maybe the TAs can explain this more because they're the expert here.
yeah, Chris, you have it correct. I mean, you probably want to run the apt-get update earlier because essentially it's basically giving you a list of like the most recent, most accurate version of what's in the Ubuntu apt repository. So yeah, you want to do the apt update earlier. And then if Conda itself depends on that libcurses library, um, you probably need
So
to install that
I
library
see.
for the
So
uh,
it kinda needed the library just to do the run in the first place.
yeah, sounds like it.
Because SAMtools, when you look at SAMtools, is actually installed on the Docker, even without that line. It's just it doesn't run because it's missing this package. That's why I added it at the top because I don't yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, troubleshooting.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. I'm gonna try that.
I don't know. I guess it's I mean I know I joined late, so I forgot I don't know what was covered in today's session. But I had maybe if you guys have time, I wanted to ask some questions about Whittle, more like advanced Whittle, I guess question, or maybe.
We'll do our best. If we can't answer your questions, we'll pass them along to someone who can.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's really that advanced, but I'll just pull up where exactly my question, the repo that I've been working on. So many screens here. Okay. Okay, so maybe let me share my screen. Share desktop too. Okay. So can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I've been working on sort of like this consensus fusion pipeline that use multiple fusion calling tool. And I tried to put together each of them into their own sort of Widow workflow. So the way I've split it, I don't know what's the best practice. I guess this is kind of we'll get into my question. So for each tool, I create a separate Widow. I plan to at least. And so I have their own pipeline. You can see here. And if you go into one of them, you can see I split the tasks separately and I split the workflow separately. I've seen some Widow like what we did yesterday, where within one file, we have the workflow, and then right after the workflow, we have the task. But I've seen like some of the more advanced versions where they say that okay, you should separate the task into its own whittle. So this would be just a task. I mean, don't need to go into detail. And then I have the actual workflow where it's calling those tasks into its own whittle. So I'm just trying to figure out what is the best practice, right? Because at the end, the overall workflow will have all the separate tools, and each tool have multiple steps. It's like kind of like doing the detection, the alignment, and then the QCing and all these things. That's what I'm trying to figure out what's the most as you're creating something so big, like what's the recommended practice? Should I separate tasks and workflows, or should I combine task and workflow into one, or even things like that? Yeah.
This definitely qualifies as an advanced topic for me. So you know, it to to my ear, it sounds like the latter of your suggestions makes the most sense to combine everything in one workflow. But that's just, the kind of low level whittle work that I'm familiar with. Um, I think it would be much nicer to have one of our whittle writing experts answer this question. Would you mind kind of summarizing your question inside of a paragraph and sending it as an email to DSP Workshops, and I'll make sure it gets to the right person.
Okay, yeah. PhD workshop.
And I can sort of answer like the non-best practice part of it. So I can say that like Dockstore supports both options. So obviously if you put everything within a gigantic whittle file, that will work. But we also understand like you have an import statement there, like with
Yeah.
relative path. So we support
So,
that, but we also support you can put an HTTP reference. Like you can reference using a URL as well as a
yeah,
relative
I
path.
think this would be my next step, hopefully.
So you have a few options there, but um I think yeah, I'd have to delegate to a more whittle expert to say what's the best practice. But I can say that Dockster is compatible with a number of these
Okay.
options.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'll send the shorter summarized question to the group, and then
Wonderful. We'll
maybe,
get it
yeah.
answered for you for sure.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. I guess do you have any other questions? You're our last person. All right.
No,
Well,
that was it. That was it. Yeah, thank you.
all right.
Cool.
Well, thanks very much. Feel free to fill out the survey. I know you missed some of today, but maybe today was
Yes.
useful for you
That's
anyway.
yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, thanks very much, and we'll post up the recording so that you can share it with others, and I'll be waiting for your question.
Very
Thank
cool.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.